If people thought that Edward VI was a boring Tudor ruler, well, they only had to wait a little bit of time for the next bit of royal razzmatazz. Just after he died, and 9 days of Lady Jane Grey, Queen Mary I was ready to set Britain alight. Literally. She certainly wasn't here to mess around, and if people were starved of Tudor turmoil, well, their stomachs were about to get filled right to the very top. So, let's learn about Mary I, Henry's eldest child, also known very aptly as Bloody Mary. Firstly, Mary was born on the 18th of February 1516 in Greenwich Palace. Her mother was Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Catherine had 6 children, but Mary was the only one who survived into adulthood. Mary was actually an incredibly talented child. She became very skilled at the virginal, which was an old-fashioned keyboard, and she also spoke many different languages such as Latin, French and Spanish. However, Henry VIII couldn't quite get over the fact that she wasn't a boy, so at the age of 9 he sent her to live on the border of Wales to be a kind of mini Princess of Wales. As she grew older, her parents' marriage broke down, which led to the tiny event of Henry VIII making up his own church just so he could divorce her and get with somebody else. After the divorce, it was decided that Mary was now illegitimate. This meant that she was no longer in line for the crown. She was behind Edward and her older half-sister Elizabeth. She was also now referred to as the Lady Mary, which is great and posh, but it's not quite as good as Princess, if you ask me. After her father married Anne Boleyn, she didn't recognise her as the new Queen of England. She also didn't recognise her half-sister Elizabeth as a princess. This just made Henry quite mad. This relationship worsened and worsened until the two just didn't really talk for 3 years. Mary remained close to her mother, Catherine of Aragon, instead, until she died in 1536, where Mary was overcome by grief. The family tension didn't die down until Henry married his final wife, Catherine Parr, who managed to bring the family back together again, until Henry died in 1547 and Edward became ruler. This is where new cracks started to appear.
As we know, religion was always a touchy subject in the family. Henry made his own religion when he didn't get what he wanted. Edward and Elizabeth followed his example, being proud Protestants. But Mary stuck to the religion she had been brought up in. She was a get ready for the alarms.
Because of this, Edward couldn't think of anything worse than Mary becoming queen after he died, because she might get rid of all the changes he'd made to religion. He named his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, his heir, because, well, she was a Protestant. This removed any chance of Mary coming to the throne and bringing the Catholic faith back to dominate over England again. And it worked for all of 9 days. Lady Jane Grey was crowned queen on the 10th of July 1553, but by the 19th of July, Mary had created her own army of supporters and managed to push Lady Jane well out of the way. Mary was now Queen of England as she had always wanted, and the first Queen of England to rule over on her own without a king. Mary celebrated this lavishly by riding into London amongst a host of popular support, as well as her half-sister Elizabeth and 800 noblemen. Now it was time for her to make her mark on her country. As expected, Mary got straight to work in returning Britain to the Catholic ways of the past. She didn't say that you had to follow the Catholic faith, but her actions made people scared to do anything else publicly. Before the end of her first year in power, she had gotten rid of all the new laws that Henry and Edward had put in place for religion. Religion in England was now back under control of the Pope in Rome. The Roman Catholic era was back. Let's go! But there were still a lot of loud and proud Protestants in England who, if they didn't convert to the Catholic faith, were labelled as heretics. This is someone who has ideas that are different to what a religion or law teaches. And this is where she got the nickname Bloody Mary. She was known to have heretics executed just for following a different religion to her. It is thought that 287 people were publicly executed during her reign. Her execution method of choice? Well, that would have to be burning them at the stake. This is where the victim was tied to a large wooden pole and a fire was lit underneath them. Grim. But this wasn't the only fire in her reign, because she needed the flame of love to produce an heir to the throne. Does this sound similar to anything else we've covered yet? She so desperately needed this heir because if she did not have a son, then her half-sister, Elizabeth, would become queen, and she was... I just can't be bothered, guys. She was a Protestant, so I could just copy and paste what I said in the Edward video. She didn't want all of her work to be undone, so it would go from Catholic to Protestant, and so on. You know what it's all about by now. Either way, the man who stepped up to the role was Prince Philip of Spain, who was Mary's first cousin. What is it with these royal family members marrying other people in their family? No comment. Anyway, Mary was shown a portrait of Philip in 1553 and she was immediately in love with the young prince, who was 11 years younger than Mary. Unfortunately, he only wanted this marriage for political reasons. He wasn't in love at all. That didn't change the fact that she was completely in love with him and that she wanted to marry the young prince. But the rest of England, they weren't sold on him. Some people didn't like him because he was Catholic, shock, and some didn't like it because they wanted Mary to marry an Englishman, and he was Spanish. However, they still married on the 25th of July 1554, just 2 days after meeting for the first time. I mean, young Phil, he couldn't even speak any English, so they had to communicate in a range of ways, such as Latin, French, Spanish, and all of that. What show-offs! I can barely speak English. In this marriage, no matter how hard they tried, they just didn't have any children. She did, however, have many false pregnancies. Perhaps this was brought on by her intense yearning for a male heir. Her belly would bloat up, and it would certainly look like she was pregnant, but she wasn't. However, this change in appearance was not just random. It is thought that it was actually a form of cancer that caused these effects. And unfortunately, this would lead to her demise. She died on November the 17th, 1558, being buried in Westminster Abbey. Even though Philip was never truly in love with Mary, he did write that he felt a reasonable regret about her death. So, to wrap up, here are some extra facts that I did not quite get time to delve into. During her reign, there was a massive famine, which meant the crops didn't grow. This meant her kingdom had nothing to eat, so they died of starvation. It is thought to be due to immense rainfall and floods. Right at the end of her reign, England lost Calais, which was their last overseas bit of land. This was a massive knock to her credibility, as England now had no land outside of England. Philip was always away from England, whether that was for politics, war, or anything like that. This left Mary lonely and depressed. I mean, she was so in love with her husband. It's just a shame that he didn't love her back. It is believed that Bloody Mary had over 280 people killed for being heretics. This is obviously a lot of people, but nowhere near the amount of her father, Henry VIII. Yet, we don't remember him by some funny nickname, do we? But that's none of my business. Overall, Mary will be remembered for trying to take England back to the Roman Catholic Church and undo all of the work that her father and her brother had done. A hopeless romantic who was unable to give birth to a future king or queen, Mary only reigned for a short 5 years, which paled in comparison to her half-sister Elizabeth I, who reigned for a lot longer after her. And I'll talk about that in our next video. God, I can't wait to talk about changes in religion again.